Good evening, and welcome to tonight's Artist on Artist lecture series. The series was established in 2001, and it invites contemporary artists to explore the work of an artist in Dia's collection or art programs. I'd like to thank the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, as well as Brooklyn Brewery for of course, the complimentary beverages tonight. I would also like to thank John Sprague, Patrick Heilman, Rebecca Rice, Carrie David, and Sarah Kovac for their kind help in the coordination of this program. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce Babette Mangolte. Babette was born in France in 1941. Early in her career, she was one of the first women accepted into the cinematography program at the National School of Photography and Cinematography in Paris. Recently, she reflected on this feat by stating, "In Paris, I went to a film school for cinematography, and there I was the only woman with 29 men." After graduation, not surprisingly, she struggled to find work in Paris and decided to move to New York City in 1970 at the age of 29. Upon her arrival, she worked closely with Chantal Akerman as cinematographer for several of her films, including Hotel Monterey and the renowned Jean Dielman in 1974. Oh, was it? Oh, okay, 75. I'll tell IMBD about that. In 1972, Yvonne Rainer commissioned Babette as cinematographer her first film, Lives of Performers, and shortly thereafter for Rainer's next film, A Film About a Woman Who, in 1974. During this time, Mangolte was photographing choreographies by not only Rainer, but also fellow Judson Church choreographers Trisha Brown, Lucinda Childs, and Steve Paxton. In addition, Mangolte documented the experimental theater productions of Richard Foreman and Robert Wilson and performances by Joan Jonas and Bob Whitman. By the late 1970s, Mangolte began directing her own films, including The Camera, J'ai or La Camera, in 1977, and Water Motor, 1978, a film based on Trisha Brown's choreography of the same name. Although Mangolte stopped photographing performances in the 1980s, she has continued to make films. Some recent ones include Visible Cities, made in 1991, and La Modèle de Pickpocket? Of 2003, a documentary based on Robert Bresson's Models. Babette and I first met this past August when she generously welcomed Dia curator Jasmine Raymond and I into her studio on Greenwich Street in Tribeca. Over tea and biscuits, we carefully, and with a bit of astonishment on my part, looked through contact sheet after contact sheet, each featuring some of the most profound performance documentation taken over the past 50 years. But as many of you know, to say her work only documents is a tremendous understatement. For those that have had the pleasure to view, watch, and take in Babette's work, you know that her careful intellectual framing, coupled with her intuitive understanding of performance, both in her photographs and films, carved out a new space where the performativity of choreographic thinking transcends the time-bound moment of an action-oriented event. Focused on the intersection of movement with image making, Babette's practice allows us to view and reflect on the way action, memory, and framing inscribe the potential of alternative perception in both the making and seeing of art. She has truly created a medium of her own where, in the artist's words, looking is my subject. Please join me in welcoming Babette Mangolte.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for this kind introduction. So I'm going to try to read, and I also will somewhat ad-lib additional comment from my text. So I will start by stating that I'm here as a witness of a transformative moment in Yvonne Rainer's creative life when she moved to feature film after a 10 years reign as the most influential choreographer of her generation. I owe a great debt to Yvonne Rainer, who trusted me, and in return opened a new world to me during the shooting of that first film, Lives of Performer, which was filmed in April '72. I was coming from a conventional background anchored in classical theater in France, and totally ignorant of what is movement. I had seen only a couple of bad ballet when I was a kid, and I was absolutely not interested in dance. What counted as key to the performing art for me were the text, the voice, and the actor, basically what is retained of the performing art in film. Scenic display and ornament were also important, but I had no concept of dance, really, and I had seen nothing. So when I arrived in 1970, I think shortly after that, Yvonne did a concert in the New York University Loeb Student Center, which was on LaGuardia Place. The building has been changed, and now it's still NYU, but it's not the same site, the same architecture, if you want. So the lobby had the top floor, and the performance then Yvonne's structure was on the two levels, the top floor and the ground floor of that lobby. And I had no concept of what I was looking at. Not only I could not figure out which level I should be on, but there was no seating, so there was no point of view imposed to us. And the fact, that concept of us having to decide something was beyond me, basically. So the dancers were in the middle of the NYU student going on with their lives. So you made no difference, basically, between the dancer moving around in, contemporary clothes and the student. In many ways, it was confusing for somebody who is really logical, mathematician, like me, coming from France a week before, I was unable to comprehend anything and was bewildered. And actually, I totally dismissed what I had seen, thinking it was not important. But a year later, in December 71, I'm introduced to Yvonne and recommended to as a cinematographer, which is something I desperately wanted to do. And I was not absolutely sure I could do it well, but I had the training because I had gone to school and I had worked on feature films, so I knew what was required, if you want, and I'd been an assistant on several features, so I had some practice, but not really as the person deciding everything. And all of that had happened in the French language, too. And in 71, a year after being in New York, my English was about 200 words. It was more than the 4 I came with, but it was not quite comparable to Yvonne. Yvonne was looking for a camera person, and I never knew if Annette Michelson, who recommended me and who had seen my work in France, therefore believed I could do it, had suggested me because I was the only woman trained for the job that was around. I never actually knew. I could ask now, Yvonne, do you remember if you asked for a camera person or who was a woman, or you did not care, really? It's kind of historically interesting to know if it was the case or not. Later on, I was often asked to be a cinematographer because I was a woman in all-woman crews. So there was a moment in the early 70s where women movement congregate around the idea of, especially in France, of invent a woman language. So if no men are around, we are going to be on our own, and we are going to be able to think really in a different way. And in 73, that's why I was exposed to that with Chantal Ackerman, and in France, in Paris, and that's really created a bonding, which was really important in my work with Chantal. So my first meeting with Yvonne was constrained because my English was so poor. Yvonne, who is in love with words and is a gifted writer, was dubious about what I could do. I kind of felt it, She gave me a script to read, and I thought the script was very detailed and clear and totally precise, except for the dance part. There was the dancer performed what she said, but I had no idea what she said was. I did not even know it was a dance, which was about 6 minutes, So for me, duration is important as a filmmaker. Before Yvonne, just the action to be performed was enough as an indication. But the fact the script was so specific and was so written was really attractive to me. I'm not sure I was comprehending the overall structure, but I felt I was really lucky because having a filmmaker, a director who know what they want is key to doing a good job as a cinematographer. It's the most important thing. Indecision is totally horrible in filmmaking. And if you work with people who know what they want, you can react to what they want and try to do it for them, basically. So at least your biggest responsibility is taken care of. It's just guessing work, but and technical know-how. To be flexible is also very important, and I must say I realized that Yvonne had both certitude and adaptability in excess in '72. I felt, I was in a way asked to do the job in December. The film was set to be done in April because there was a date at the Whitney afterwards where some of the film will be shown as part of a performance. So I felt that I had to understand how to look at their dance. And in February '72, that's the first time I went to see a dance concert with Yvonne and dancer from the Judson. It was actually part of the Grand Union group, and it was in a loft and on Green Street, which was absolutely packed, and the performer had hardly any space, a space which is about a small circle around my lectern, and it was crowded all around. I'm sure the fire department will have come there, will have closed, because it must have been illegal to have so many people there. So the dancer had very little room, and obviously when I shot my photograph, I have audience in the back of them, and I could not really circulate. But I kind of understood what was going on, because at least I was trapped in one position, and I could concentrate on what to look at in a way, maybe because they had no room to wander in many directions. So I also took my first dance photograph, and that was kind of interesting because there's a thrill, you don't know exactly when you pick the choice to click at that point in the course of a movement, what is the end result. So it's really thrilling, actually, to shoot a movement which is unpredictable, and improvisation is totally unpredictable. So I also realized, and looking at dance movement, I was able to analyze the movement by shooting photographs. So in a way, that's how I felt, and I could learn to look at the movement. And besides, I always felt photography was, a practice to become a filmmaker. So what was counted for me is, can I film something? Then I know how to look. And that I felt, then if I know how to look, I will be able to film it. Because I had, like Yvonne, I think I had the sense that I could do things, which is useful to succeed, obviously. I prepared the film by actually going to see the next performance of Yvonne, which was at Hofstra University, and it was called Performance. He was using a solo she had done in '62, Twist Spoon, which I saw for the first time. It was also using a box then she was going to use in Love the Performer and also at the Whitney, and which was an important structural element to contain the body in a small space and to have the body adjust to each other in that contained space for dancer squeezing in a box. So in many ways, shooting that performance at Hofstra made me also realize that Yvonne's preoccupation was about having people watching her and having her watch others, and having a dancer watch what they are each doing. And her dancer were a mix of dancer, professional dancer, Balthasar the film dancing for Merce Cunningham, and being ballet trained, Shirley Soffer being absolutely not a dance trained performer, John Herman not being dance trained, and obviously Yvonne being a dancer. So the four primary performers were various in their ability, if you want. Valda having ability of ballet, then were never the one of Yvonne, for instance, but there were two dancers, the two others were not. So I could not perceive all those specific at the time, but I think it was the different body in terms of stature, in terms of height and so on, were so different from the kind of structure I had been exposed to in my youth with French ballet, which was to have everybody the same height, everybody the same tutu, everybody doing the same thing. Yeah, that was just the opposite. So obviously for the shoot, I did the budget. Yvonne gave me an idea of how much money could be spent to rent the camera, which was not rented actually to Nerd Soudarder, but it was a camera owned by Bob Rauschenberg, who was a friend. But we rented additional dancers, we rented a dolly, we rented light, and so on. And in my negotiation with my bad English, I was helped, and I'm very grateful to Jennifer Tipton, who was a friend of Yvonne, and I don't know if you know her, but she's a fantastic lighting designer with several Guggenheim and several MacArthur Grant, and is a genius at doing lighting. Since the 70s, she was moving into that field, and basically we discussed, how we could pre-lit Yvonne's loft to be able to shoot in 1 week a 90 minutes film, in which there is section which will be improvised, and I will have to, I could not relit every setup. In other words, I had to have a light which was functioning for everything. So we did what is called a concept I had learned in school of area lighting and organized on the ceiling of a traditional loft with thin foil ceiling. We hang on the sprinkler, a couple of lights, and did our best to have even light all over the place. Which was really useful because what happened when we arrived on Monday after picking up the equipment, we had done the light over the weekend, when the light before the camera arrived. I had also rented a dolly, which is called an Elemac, which was very impressive and cost a lot of money, but I was so pleased to be able to do camera move, I was really thrilled at the idea of moving on the camera and having somebody pushing me around. So we were going to start the shooting on Monday afternoon after collecting the equipment in the morning, and Fernando Torns, who was one of the 4 protagonists in the movie, in the script, was missing. He was still in Brazil and he had not arrived. There was a problem with his plane. So we sat idle, not shooting anything and counting the hours, and he did not come on Tuesday, he came only on Wednesday. So we're 2 days late. And my shooting schedule, which had been organized on Yvonne's script, was totally had to be modified. We could not shoot anything without him. It was really an ensemble piece. There was practically nothing we could do without him. So, Yvonne did not seem particularly stressed when I was literally dying, multiple deaths, imagining the total chaos in my organized shooting schedule that was pushed back. It was an important lesson. I must say, I owe so much to Yvonne because she showed me, if you cannot do anything, just don't do anything, wait around and something will happen, There was John Cage for you, it was somebody smiling no matter what, and I think Yvonne got a lot from that, this idea that somehow we could recoup, and indeed we did recoup. You don't have to lose your cool, it's going to make things worse. So in many ways, finally Fernando showed up and we went on with the shoot and we cut the 2 days when we had not shot anything. And meanwhile, in the day where there was only the 3 women missing for I did a photograph that I like a lot, which is called Shooting As a Performer, where you see the Elemac with the little camera on top of that big dolly. And you have Valda in the black dress sitting on a chair. She's back to my still camera. Yvonne is lying on the ground. And 2 women, Shirley and Epp, who was my dolly pusher and one of the dancers. We're having a private conversation on a bed. So everybody is like not doing anything if you want. You just have the apparatus there. So the image has quite a bit of charm, and Yvonne put it on the cover of her first book, so it's another thing I am grateful to Yvonne for. Now, the conceptual thing I remember from shooting Live Performer is of a different order. It was really groundbreaking for me because it was a concept which had to do with the image. We had to film a series of photographs from a preceding dance concert titled Grand Union Dreams, which had been made by Yvonne and many of her dancers a year before, and photographs had been taken of that performance. And in the script, there was a conversation which had been written with the performer and which will narrate that series of photographs. Now, we had no optical bench where you can position the film camera shooting down on a flat surface and you put the photograph, the print, flat on the table, you put light on either side, and you can reframe the photograph in your movie camera. You know, we did not have that. We had to put the photograph on the wall and shoot on a tripod because we had no apparatus it could have been rented, but we did not have spare money. So Yvonne decided, and I was really bewildered, because she decided to actually, instead of putting one photograph at the time, to put the photograph in a jumble and to put the photograph at a diagonal in the center of a pack of other documents, if you want, with photograph of the same performance. But there's one standing in the center, which was not even level, if you want. And we were shooting something wider than the photograph. And the commentary were actually about that photograph we were looking at, which was changed. And I thought it was so interesting to do it like that, because instead of having an insert of the print, which gives you an idea of a kind of still moment of being there in the performance, a kind of trompe-l'œil effect, there, what was outlined is the narration of the people in the background who were commenting on the photograph in which they were. They were also commenting on the fact they were not there at the right place, and so on. So what happened is that narration appeared improvised. Although Yvonne had written the conversation, including ad-lib remarks that appeared generally improvised, but were scripted. I had read them in the script in December. It was so brilliant to stage this commentary as if it was an improvisation. I was fascinated by it because instead of showing the document as an illustration, it was shown as possibly biased information. It was also shown in the middle of other information we were not even discussing. What was even more brilliant was the fact that the pilot photo appeared to misrepresent the past performance of the Grand Union Dreams. Indeed, here in Genesis, I should have foreseen the whole intellectual debate about performance history, the fact that actually a photograph misrepresents, which I'm happy to say my photograph misrepresents like everybody else. So in many ways, Live Performer was a film which was really a series of vignettes anchored by a strong pathos coming from melodramatic reference to betrayal and conflict, but also memory of shared moment in the life of the performer who we saw on the screen, and we saw also dance or rehearse in the loft where the film was taking place. So the film combined elements of film narration with the episodic structure of a dance concert. And actually, at the end, something got tacked on after, which was not part of the original script, which was really a wonderful addition to the film. In '72, a script of a famous silent film by George W. Pabst, Lulu, Pandora's Box, with Louise Brooks, which is a film which is famous because Louise Brooks is a famous film actress of the silent era who had a very shortened career in the talkies and disappeared from film. But performance in a couple of films in 27, 28, 29. And in particular, the two films she did with Pabst are absolutely illuminating. They were rediscovered, like many silent films, in the 60s, and a script in English of that German film was printed with steel frame enlargement of the film. And that book was used by Yvonne, and she made a selection of the frame enlargement. She wanted the cast of live performer to reenact. And those images were reenact because I modeled the light out of the very expressionist light of the Pabst movie, which had been shot in 1929. And for me, it was really interesting to do because I could decipher from the frame enlargement at which height the camera had been with the body, and I mimicked all that. So it was really technically intuitive, not so much skill in terms of light, but skill in terms of deciphering from looking at an image how it could have been shot. And obviously I knew the film by heart. I had seen it many times at the French Cinematheque. If one thing I knew when I was shooting Yvonne's first film is I knew film, you know. Specifically I knew silent film. And in many ways, Liza Performer was shot like a silent film. Most of the sound was dub. Was dubbed after the fact. So when we shot it, we had an Reflex S camera, which was very noisy, so we could not record sync sounds. So the sound was done after the fact. And that was really important in the visualization of the image, and I was aware of how the Italian deal with, post-synchronization, like neorealism, and Rossellini, who shot non-sync. So all of those things were kind of interesting, and in all my film practice, I kept, using the Reflex S and dubbing the sound afterwards, because I think sync sound is just good for television and interview, and the sound should be reinvented. And I think it's not, for Yvonne, if she had wanted, we will have rented a camera and we will have not have an Elemac. It was really a decision where the money will be spent, but she was fine with doing the film like that. And for me, that was definitely the way to go, because we will avoid, fake naturalism. And obviously, with somebody who comes from the performing art, naturalism is not their language, So I thought it was the good, like at the time they called it the apparatus, it was the good system to use for the shooting of that film. So I think the film was an immediate success. I mean, there was plenty of very complimentary and detailed analysis of the film, and it benefited Yvonne, who I think really felt that filmmaking was a new mission in life. And I think he also positioned her as a strong voice, woman voice, and I will discuss that later, in a film world in New York, which was totally male-dominated. So we'll go back to that a little bit after, because, when I met her, Yvonne was a star, She had a charisma which was amazing. She just had to appear in a concert and people were flocking to see her. She could sell her house with 100 people in a loft that could reasonably contain only 100. Nobody thought about the possibility of Yvonne stopping to dance, actually, in 1972. She continued to raise money for new performance, and it's how she funded her first film, Story About a Woman Who Is a Performance, which follow lives of performer and help create the funding for the film inspired by Story About a Woman Who, which is film about a woman who. So the performance, which I still prefer to the film, considering I was involved in both, was a story about a woman who, the performance, which has a script published in Yvonne's first book, work, which is a total masterpiece. I suppose many of you know it. The performance was sold out. It ran for 3 weeks, 4 days a week, at the Theatre for the New City on Jane Street with Jennifer Tipton having designed the light. So it was beautifully lit, and I did stunning picture because the light was so good. I could not miss photograph of story. I was doing the tech change between slide and film projector. So I was in the booth, and absolutely adore the piece that I still prefer to the film, yeah. And it's a story about a woman who she danced 3OA, so that's how I saw it for the first time, next to John Erdman as a non-trained dancer. She had done already, a duo of 3OA, either in synchronized or one person starting a minute before another one with Steve Paxson, Becky Arnold, the dancer of the Judson. So retroactively, because I did a little bit of research to make sure what I'm telling you is supported historically, I really felt that Yvonne, in Life of a Performer, she used what she said, and she had choreographed for the performance at Hofstra, which I had photographed. But it's used again in Story About a Woman Who, but it was filmed in Lives of Performers, so it's not filmed again in Film About a Woman Who. So in other words, the fragment of the choreographic work, which is resurfacing in a film, but not in another, and she's jumbled piece of the puzzle, basically. And later on also, I will see that as a key way of a key form to illuminate their practice, you could say. So, the format of doing a performance which permit to finalize a script, which later on is going to turn into the film, was used on their third film, in which I worked only very briefly, Christina Talking Picture. And after that, she stopped. And I think the stop is very interesting because it created a breakthrough, and it's in their fourth film. Now, with the woman movement, and especially a film about a woman who, in '74, Yvonne had become a filmmaker, indeed getting out of choreography more or less by '75. And the woman movement carried her through this threshold, and people started to mourn Yvonne's desertion of the dance world. So the people who had known Yvonne dance work in the '60s were often ambiguous about her moving to film in many ways. There was a split of allegiance, It's really interesting. I mean, people blame you for your decision, That's amazing to me. In any case, at the time, I had no concept. I had seen the dance I had seen in the performance before Lives of Performer. I had seen the film. I had filmed those performances integrated into the film. I was in the middle of it. I was not really distant from it, and I was learning really how to do film. So my first film, Kelly, my first film as Yvonne, as a star. And it's called What Maisie Knew, which has woman performer doing little performance and ad-libbing silly game for a little child behind the camera. So, and really there Yvonne was there as a friend of mine, but also as a performer in a film which is improvised on a loosely based adaptation of an Amy James novel, What Maisie Knew, is really having the fun of her time. So you understand she really liked to be in front of a camera, but did not really like to see herself or to be seen. But in a way, because she was doing it in front of me, and it was, we were just goofing around, basically, it was fine. So What Maisie Knew has that charm of really, it's really a film which is improvised, that's really true, but at the same time it's a film which just could be done in '73, '74 when I shot it. I mean, there's moments where you can capture authenticity of behavior with not a manipulation of an action, if you want, because, I don't know if I'm clear, but it's people having fun, in a way. That's it. That's what is so strange. And obviously, in the concept of what we do now, nobody has fun. I mean, that's for sure. That's gone. For the time being, it's gone. Okay. Now, before I go to the film scene, you know, which will be my second part, I want to finish on Yvonne as a performer, because in a way, in my film What Made Me New, she's really extremely relaxed, and other women are around her, and you know, nothing is really planned. It's mostly about waiting also, what I shoot. But Yvonne, as a performer, when she was essentially a dancer, was always a kind of reluctant performer. And I think it's maybe because of this reluctance then she was a star. On stage, you could not take your eyes away from her. She was self-assured and totally contained in a restrained energy that was projecting an extreme concentration. She was intensely in the present of the performance on stage as well as in front of the movie camera. I think she probably, you know, there's a famous quote of Steve Paxson saying then, which I read recently in a conversation published in October magazine between Yvonne and Trisha Brown in '79. At the time, Trisha was going to do for the first time Glacial Decoy in New York with a set in a Proscenium Theater at Marymount with a set of Rauschenberg, who was a total first for Trisha because she had mostly done dance which were with no set, against a nondescript background in the leopard space, which now is the cafeteria at BAM, for instance, or in her studio in various lofts. So there was no theatrical scenery, if you want. There was no costume. People were in leotard, white or black in general, or sometimes color in the roof piece in '73. But there was that sense of no ornament, and obviously Rauschenberg devised those absolutely stunning dresses which were transparent, seeing the body underneath, and with little sleeve there, so you had naked. I mean, it's gorgeous costume. It was to die for, you know. And suddenly they were moving their leg and doing what Trisha does so well, you know. And you barely saw the body under the translucent fabric then Rauschenberg had found. And, you know, Trisha and Yvonne were asked probably by Annette Michelson to record comment about that shift in Trisha's work. And first in '79, you see Yvonne really looking very carefully and understanding perfectly what Trisha is doing. Obviously, they were very close friends from the 1960 and Alprint workshop. But not only that, you also understand Trisha's understanding of her own work. And she feels now she knows enough about her movement that she can put men with a company of women, which she's going to do the next year in Upper Loop, and she knows she's going to use music, and indeed '79 is the beginning of a new Trisha, basically, and he was capturing that conversation. And I think Yvonne is so smart and at the same time so incisive, you know. I really think Yvonne first is a writer, second a choreographer, filmmaker. She's first a writer. Okay, that's my own opinion. Okay, so where am I? Yeah, so I think I'm going to shift to where I'm here for, because I'm also a witness of the experimental film scene, 1972, so I want to kind of go there. And very much when I arrived in October '70, and the next day I went to Anthology Film Archive, was presented to Journals Makers, met Stan Brakhage, met Michael Snow. I came to New York to see Michael Snow and Wavelength. So that was important to me, but you know, that was definitely a film scene which was very, very prolific, but very much anti-narrative. Film had been defined as primarily visual by Stan Brakhage in his metaphor of vision, following Maya Deren's footstep, which had initiated really the scene in the '40s with Meshes in the Afternoon, and also in her film choreography for the camera and Ritual in Transfigure Time, one of her masterpieces. But a shift in the late 60s was just happening with Michael Snow. And I think it's because Snow introduced a musical concept of structure via the soundtrack that had been ignored by Brakhage. Snow was a jazz musician and had a group and performed every week in New York and also in Toronto, where he lives, and still does, I think, improvised jazz. So music and rhythm was really key to his imagination. And obviously, Wavelength, the crowd-through picture of Michael Snow, we got a prize at Knock-le-Zouk in Belgium in '67, and that's the reason I had never seen the film, but I knew it was an important film. As an absolutely gorgeous soundtrack, you have a pitch which increases, and you have the sound of the traffic on Canal Street in a loft, which come and go, because sometimes it's at night and sometimes it's in the day, there's a phone conversation, so there's fractured ambient sound, but there's also a continuous increase tone, if you want. There is a famous text written by Steve Reich the day after the screening of Michael Snow Wavelength at the Cinematheque of John Jonas, who sent an ecstatic message to, Steve Reich obviously is a great musician, sent an ecstatic message to Michael Snow because of his film, and I'm sure it has to do with his soundtrack. So obviously Wavelength has other things things which actually, I don't think Yvonne really liked Michael Snow at all, but there's something then she shared with him. It's pun, it's the idea of making joke with words, and I always say Wavelength is a joke because you go to the full length of a loft and you end up at the end on a photograph of a wave, but it's still, so it takes you 45 minutes to reach a still frame. Which is the length of a wave, basically. So the pun is in the title. And obviously, you have a brilliant series of temporal continuity and discontinuity in the film because he shifts a stark, it's negative, it's reversal, there's filtered, and he bring up and down in front of the camera. And obviously, he could not do a zoom without moving the camera because the length of the loft was too long, so he had to adjust, the height of the camera and make sure he could reposition his camera from here, from there, until he got close enough. So, it was really, it took a week to shoot, It's not a continuous shot, although he appeared to be, All of that I absolutely adore, okay. Now, in the 60s, another great filmmaker is Andy Warhol, obviously, who is totally, I wrote here, is the lone wolf investigating portraiture following on Jack Smith's excess in Flaming Creature. And, you have had Maya Deren in the 40s and early 50s, and Shirley Clark, who went to Harlem to shoot, the Cold War with only African-American, black people, we called them at the time. But they were isolated, if you want, and in the late 60s, 70s, New York was totally dominated by male filmmakers. So when Yvonne came on the scene, he created a buzz because suddenly there was another voice. And not only that voice was the one of a woman, but it was also a voice who spoke stories. And the film scene was anti-narrative. So visuality was the main concern and was also the main structural device. Film and video were considered two different mediums, and film audience were not factoring the concept behind structuralist cinema. In other words, structuralist cinema was exploring the camera apparatus and eventually the projection, but not really interested in the way the audience will interact with those in many ways. So the place you went to, if you were interested with spectatorship, is really Alfred Hitchcock. That's where I went to. That was left to classical cinema, like Alfred Hitchcock and some of the new wave film, a little bit of Godard. Experimental filmmaker were focusing on film form rather than, in New York, where in the experimental avant-garde, rather than on content and emotion. And Yvonne moved to film in her work, aimed to reach emotion and recall memories. That's what she told me in '72, you know, that's what she wanted to do, and she could not do in dance. So she had moved to another medium, which was still a term used at the time, you know, it sounds so foolish now. But she definitely, the emotional angle was important. And my point is, by doing so, by wanting to reach emotion and recall memory, she brought herself into her film as a spectator looking in. And you see that, I never retaught that argument, and I did not have time. You know, I did a lot of reading, really, about interview or text then Yvonne wrote, or I did a lot of reading to prepare my speech, but I did not have time to look at all the film, you know, which are in my library at my university in California. But, you know, time-based work now, we don't have time to do it, you know. It's horrible, horrible. If you're a filmmaker, you cannot even study what you want to study, you know. So anyway, in film about a woman who, there is basically one woman, but there's three women. So you have the sense then those three women interpret different facets of one woman. It's the woman who. So it's a kind of, it's not totally a generic woman who, you know, but it's not totally only Yvonne Rainer. And that sense of being a spectator looking in inside the film is very much Yvonne in Film About a Woman Who, as a performer. She is the one looking at the other, if you want. So that I got that from the second film. And obviously, thinking about what it is to be watched was central to a choreographic effort, and it will remain at the core of her early film in the first decade of a filmmaker. So it's another reason for me to believe there is no real difference between her as a choreographer and as a filmmaker, which for a long time was assumed to be the case. There was a kind of divorce between the two personas. I don't believe it. Her films are anchored in words, not words only as dialogue, but words often as narration commenting on series of images. And by doing so, changing the perception of what the film audience will see and comprehend. This ambivalence about meaning became the key narrative device in Yvonne Rainer's film. And that is why her early films have been so influential and immediately received critical praise as well from film critics as art critic. Why? Because self-reflexivity and psychoanalysis were on everybody's lips at the time. I mean, if film circle were doing something in the early 70s, read Freud. Even me, I read Freud in French, I must say, because my English was not good enough. But I learned a lot reading him in French, translation, obviously he wrote in German, as you know. But self-reflexivity and psychoanalysis were on everybody's lips, and intuitively, Yvonne's film were articulating a very modern version of self-reflexivity thrown in the cauldron of the feminist movement. Okay. She also imposed a focus on narration and on women concern as worthy of film script material. I must say, for me, that was important. You know, I never thought about it, but I had gone to film school and they negate the fact then, because I was the only woman, I would have problem finding a job. I discovered that after the fact. But I really felt then, you know, if we knew how to do it, where to do it, to impose a view in a way. So the woman movement came from that necessity of actually speaking what it is to be a woman. And I think Yvonne did that. And in dance, it's not really an issue. Obviously, men's lift and women are lifted. You know, so there's a big difference in ballet between a woman and a man. But in modern dance, there is no really lift, and a woman could eventually lift. And that has been attempted, I'm sure, probably by Yvonne, you know, so, because she has played a lot on stereotype in ballet, obviously. So, you know, I always felt, actually, when I started to work with Yvonne, then Yvonne did good, because as a dancer, she was not prejudiced against, if you want, because especially in American dance, I mean, the key figure have been women dancer, you know, I mean, Merce Cunningham being an exception, and Balanchine being an exception, but Martha Graham dominated modern dance for several decades, and the Judson, I mean, obviously Steve Paxton is a huge influence, but you know, Trisha and Lucinda and Yvonne were key figures. So there was that sense then, you know, in the dance world, there was not the prejudice against women than there was in the film world. And I have no, obviously the film world in New York was open to exception. And I think it was not open to women making film necessarily. But there was nothing preventing a woman making a film to be recognized, because when in my list of, I forgot Christmas on Earth, I forgot the name of the filmmaker, fantastic. She made only that film, which is a total masterpiece. She was the girlfriend of Jonas Mekas, and he saved her film, thank God. I forgot her name. She made only one film in '65. And the film is, you know the filmmaker? Barbara Rubin, thank you, yeah. So they were exception, that's true. It's a film which has two projections, one inside the other, nested in the other, and it's very much a woman's film, if you want. Now I saw the film way later, and I had no idea of, it's not even in anthologies. I mean, it's in anthology, obviously, they saved the film, but it's not in the essential cinema, yeah. It's at the filmmakers co-op. So I did not see it until way later, you know, it had no impact to me until way later. So now I want to describe something that I could not find in the document I have here in New York. I left them somewhere else. It's a frame enlargement which I made at the request of Yvonne of a moment in Film About a Woman Who, where you have a tracking shot which is going along a sofa with three women, and you're at a moment in which the tracking shot is bisecting Shirley's sofa frame. Yvonne is there, you see half of her face, and in the black separating the two face of those women who are framing close-up, you have who is the victim here, question mark. The film About Women Who used different technique of what I call self-reflexivity. And one of the key technique was titled Superimpose, like a third voice superimposed to the image, which was showing an action. And that action was actually the display of the face of those women. Later on, you end up another tracking shot, and Yvonne is a famous still that you maybe have seen if you know her work, where she has quote from oh my God, we have a senior moment, like they say. Davis, the great African American from UCSD, Angela Davis, yeah. A quote about George, I don't know, I mean, I love her, who was in jail, and it's very, very intimate kind of comment, which I'm not sure people can identify to being something which had been published by Angela Davis, but definitely it's connected with the civil rights movement through the text. So there is something which, you know, refer to a political positioning and of the woman as victim, and not the type of victim. So what I like so much is that in that image of who is victim here is the fact that when people saw it published in the script of October, which published the script of Film About Women Who, and it's probably republished in the book by Performing Arts Journal, which published all the script of Yvonne's film. You have an innuendo of the victim being the performer or being the director, because obviously Yvonne is the director who staged that image. And at the same time, does she really victimize the other or victimize herself? So for me, I see there something which resonated in the 70s as being a way of marking yourself as the author, which was an important way of defining filmmaking in the early 70s in film study, and in many ways something which benefited Yvonne in her early film, but at the same time she was not necessarily validating in her work, if you want, because I think she will have been pretty much against the concept of a singular authorial voice. Now, Yvonne is an avid reader, and so in all theoretical concepts she can put her hands on, okay? After having exhausted the rhetoric of minimalism and the alternative art practice against the museum world and the art market prevalent in the 70s, early 70s, she turned to what was the beginning of the film study scene that was booming around psychoanalysis and cinema. And I think psychoanalysis, in its relation to film, became the anchor of her fourth film, which for me is her ultimate masterpiece, Journey from Berlin / 1971. And the film was finished in 1980, but took 2.5 years to do. She had a residency in Berlin, and the film was done in Berlin at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, and very little in New York, and pretty much done totally by Yvonne. She edited the film. She did not shoot it. She used different camera people in the different city where she had funding. But she staged speech in a very interesting way. The film is made of a conversation of a she and a he, Vito Acconci's voice and Amy Taubin's voice, which you don't see, which is staged over a mantelpiece, which has photograph and memento, if you want, moving and changing, and where there is actually a photograph of a historical figure from Russia anarchist movement in the 1860. Things, therefore, which are not of the quotidian of the people living in that living room. You see only object, and it's very nice. You have a scene in a gallery which was built with a reclining floor, a little bit like in Richard Foreman plays, in the Whitechapel Gallery. And Annette Michelson is the psychoanalytic analysand, if you want. She's the patient of analysis, and she has a kind of garbled language that she had to learn over rehearsal with Yvonne over a period of six months. So there was an extreme intensive work made by Yvonne to actually modulate a speech, which is a kind of new speech, which we can fathom some of it, but not the totality of it. So there's a certain obscure element there. I think what I think is great in the film is the sincerity of all the part and the fact then everything is so eccentric and there is no narrative logic. Although there's narrative episode, if you want, there is no master narrative, which is obviously for somebody from my generation, obviously I'm younger than Yvonne. I don't know if for Yvonne it's so important, but for me as a filmmaker, my dream has always been to make abstract film which have no story, basically. So I'm not, my first film is a kind of narrative film, What Maisie Knew, but all my other films avoid narrative like The Pest, So in many ways, I felt a move to narrative was interesting because it was commenting on images, and that was fascinating. It was deconstructing images, if you want, but in Journeys from Berlin, she's really inventing something that you could not do in any other way than film. So I think it's a very original film for that. But the film is hard, and it's not pleasurable. And there's a beautiful interview done by Scott MacDonald about another film of Yvonne, which he made later, about menopause, which is called Privilege. And he says it's a film which is so pleasurable for the audience, unlike Journey from Berlin / 71. He said, And I think he's right. Privilege is really pleasurable. It's a beautiful film which deals with race and with, you know, a phase in life that many of you, many of you have not gone through, but every woman will go through it at some point or another. And indeed, Yvonne has chronicled in her work, you know, element of her life, as we all know, but it's always transmuted in a way, so it's never too overbearing. In many ways, the comment of Scott MacDonald was made many interviews with experimental filmmaker of the fact that Yvonne does not think about the pleasure of the film is answered by Yvonne, but I give them the pleasure of the text. And I thought that's totally revealing. Really, indeed, if you want to have pleasure in Journeys from Berlin, you read the script, which obviously is published, yeah. And there's a great text by Noel Carroll about it. So, now, you can argue then for a filmmaker like me, I'm really a filmmaker, was a trajectory very different from Yvonne because I don't come from another area, and also I looked at film way before making a film. I had looked at film for like 12 years before making my first film. Started in 73, I started to look at film in 60 and went to film school in 64, so I have a very different focus. Film, for me, still is always about somebody looking at something, and it's also about the consequences of looking. And I discovered yesterday, actually, Yvonne, in a comment made in '69, I actually bought again the book of Carrie Lambert Betty at DIA because I had left the book in California, and in her book being watched, there was that quote that I wanted to, from Yvonne, that I wanted to give you. And it's a quote which is in excerpt of the book. And it's a quote from Yvonne. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's 1969, at the time where Yvonne had made a couple of short films, but I don't think the idea she would become a full-time filmmaker a couple of years later. So Yvonne reflects on theater as being about and I quote, the irreducible fact of one group of people looking at another group. And so I thought then the fact Yvonne in '69 was asking herself, who is watching here? You know, who is watching what I'm doing in a dance concert? Is definitely a key question if you want to become a filmmaker. Basically, it's the key question. Who is watching? Not so much who is watching the film I'm making, but which are the eyes I'm going to describe in the film I'm making, you know. So obviously in her film, it's exactly a response to that comment from '69 that she did, because in Lives of Performer, she staged a group of people, you know, looking and reflecting on their life, having performed previously. In Film About a Woman Who, she's looking at friends which, you know, speak out gender differences in a very theatrical setup, pile of dishes, you know, with a fish on top. I mean, things which are totally not naturalistic and are the most theatrical ever than Yvonne ever got to be, basically. And obviously in Journeys from Berlin /71, she used the film camera to choreograph. She showed it to me when she came back to New York in '79, and she was so proud of the choreography she had made because she had cut a beautiful scene with an angle with a church, 1920 church in Berlin, and a dancer. And she worked very hard doing it because I think she shot over a period of a month, and the editing is extremely intricate, and it's kind of a cubistic. It's definitely all something to Picasso Braque, frankly. And it's a dance. It's a dance done with a film camera. But also what Berlin gave her is reinforce something which were not as present in the two first films. And I discover are still very present in their choreography, but were also very present in the choreography of the '60s. is the context with a political moment at the time you make the work. And in Berlin, obviously, when she arrived in 1977, the Red Brigade, Meinhof, who? Bader-Meinhof, had been executed by the state, and it was a big fuss. And obviously, they had been in prison for a couple of years. But terrorism had been an avenue for people who are oppressed and have no other way to fight oppression, basically. I don't endorse terrorism. Don't. Okay, we are so paranoid now about everything which has to do with pronouncing the T word, you know. But in any case, at that time, there was no paranoia about thinking terrorism in American life. It was not yet with us, but it was definitely in Berlin, and in many ways, the way she integrated that in her film is, I think, also exemplary. Yeah. And I think she brought in women and terrorism in 19th century Russia and the historical context of Russia in that film. But you could say then you have, you know, an historical context which is brought to us in a choreography she made 2 years ago in 2011, January 2011, which we saw yesterday and the day before, Assisted Living, Good Sports 2, in which you do have those people laughing their ass off, not wanting to hear anything, and Yvonne trying to tell them, but. So this kind of mix of the moment in time and the political action and the resistance to oppression is definitely a key component in many work of Yvonne Rainer, and I think it's as present in her film than in the choreography I've seen of this 21st century. So I see continuity between the 60s to 2012. I see no rupture whatsoever. I think the idea there was a rupture came from dissatisfied spectator who just wanted to see Yvonne as a star and could not let go of her being something else, you know. Now, I want to conclude with something about Yvonne and her delight in bodies of all shape and all age as material for exploring movement and inventing dance, because that's really what her new choreography has been about. And this comparison actually is made possible by the series organized by Dia, so I'm very grateful for that, because I learned a lot on Yvonne as a choreographer by looking at pieces I'd never seen. So I feel then there, you know, the multiple body had been used in Yvonne's choreography in the 60s, We Shall Run, for instance, 63, which we saw again 2 days ago and yesterday. And the photograph from 63 with Rauschenberg, Alex A., Deborah A., you know, Lucinda Child. I think Trisha was pregnant, so she's not there, you know, but all these bodies, they don't look, then they fit together, you know, they're all very different, and that was part of the Judson at the start, you know, those differences were actually what was presented as a key revolutionary moment in dance. You don't homogenize the dancer in the same costume or in the same body height or something like that. You don't create like freeze, if you want. You create dissymmetry and rupture. So I think as a filmmaker, you're always aware of the fact that what you do has to address the multiplicity of an audience and has to address multiple voice, because you know the film is going to be seen abroad, you know then it will be seen in translation, or therefore you avoid certain text, or you whatever, you negotiate that sense of multiplicity of generation looking at the film. The film, once it's done, you know, you don't have to be there, thank God, so people see it, they do what they want with it, and that's what's great about it, you know. I'm sure that's what Yvonne liked, you know, it was cast in stone, you know. But you are really aware of the multiplicity of the audience perspective when you are in a performance. The presence of people is taken for granted, but what you do is fleeting, you know. An hour later, an hour and a half later, it's gone, and some people will retain something, some people will not. It's irrelevant, basically. You don't really think at the audience as being multiple. In film, I think you do. Not that you do anything tailored to any kind of specific audience, but you want to make sure it cannot be misinterpreted in a way. So you are aware of it, and I think you feel a moral necessity to testify what you think is important for you, because in a way, making a film is so damn long, you know, it costs so much money, it's so much effort, it's so much work, it's so much this, it's so much that, then you don't do it for nothing. So in my mind, being a filmmaker demands selflessness. It demands then it cannot be something you do just for yourself. There's no way. It's too much work. And I think in Yvonne's work in dance in the 60s and in film later and in dance in the 21st century, she used in her dance collage technique with word, because she used word as the soundtrack of dance. Mine is a Muscle is full of text which was read by people who were not dancing. So the reading of the text what really was the event, I mean that moment, that scene. She also pioneered The Voice in Terrain, which is I think 63 or 65. I think it's 63, but I saw a picture of 65, so I put 65 in my text. So she used various forms of verbal speech and narration in her film, from written conversation to interview, and she even fabricated speech with Annette Michelson persona in Journeys from Berlin, and she obviously had a title commenting on the image in her film. So text is always there in her works since 63. And in the first solo, then I saw of Yvonne dancing is Twisati Spoon, which is a solo from 61, her first major work, first solo. She did it in 72, and it's incorporated in Lives of Performer. So I shot it in film, but I also shot photograph of it. And obviously I knew very well Erik Satie, because Erik Satie was the darling of the 20s avant-garde in Paris, and he died in the 30s. He had a resurgence, and his music was heard everywhere when I arrived in Paris to go to the university in the 60s. So I knew his music very well, and when I saw Yvonne, you know, moving down her legs with her finger pointed, you know, like that, with that moment in the music, I said that to Yvonne 2 days ago, you know, I knew you had a sense of humor, you know, using Satie and using the movement you use with Satie. And for me, that was really important, because I have no sense of humor, and I'm so uptight, you know. That was really good. So, and I see it all over the place now. Then I think, you know, I review everything I've seen at DIA, and I see it in the use of the Berlioz Requiem, Before We Shall Run, you know, from 63. You see it in Twist Escape. So Twist Escape is quite wonderful, because it's 62, and it was given twice in October and also in February. And I really like to be able to see it twice. The first music is Rachmaninoff, and I forgot the piece of Rachmaninoff, but it's an orchestral piece, very loud and so on. And the movement of the dancer is actually walking relatively fast, but regularly over the square of the performance space in a kind of raincoat, okay? The raincoat is important, because the raincoat is going to be taken out for the second movement. The second movement, the sound, is concrete music by Lamont Young, so it's totally new music of the period. Lamont was a close friend of Yvonne. Lamont, obviously, with Yoko, opened his love to do the first performance. Simone Forti performed there in 1960. Yvonne was there, you know. It's a key name. in the imaginary of the Judson Lamont. And so the music is actually not, it's a little bit the Cajun music versus Cunningham choreography. The music is not guiding the choreography, which is a solo, which is, I think, which is leading into 308. The movement is not as complex as 308, will come several years later, 2 years later, but it's very much on the body of the dancer. We saw a dance twice by Patricia Aufbauer, by the way, with the youngest of the reindeer dancer. So the last movement is memorable. The raincoat, which has been put aside and taken out for the second movement, is brought back with a piece of white tulle, and it's put in the center of the floor. And there is amplification of the soundtrack of the body of the dancer. And what she does, she squats on the floor, take the fabric, and scream and throw herself on the floor and stand up again and scream, scream, scream. And the scream is very loudly amplified. And even in the terrible acoustic of Dia, you know, the scream is really, you know, shocking. Okay. I must say, a woman screaming in 62, what does he evoke? You know, it's a man, totally controlled by man. It's a world, I'm sorry, it's a world totally controlled by man, and you scream because of it, okay? I feel that, okay? Now you scream because, you know, we are in a world which is totally passive. People don't care if somebody dies in front of you. They are not going to stand up, you know? They're not going to do anything. So I think cynicism is what we use scream against. So I thought that scream is still totally actual, and it's why, you know, Yvonne choreography will never die, literally, because he articulates a rage which is as much, you know, the rage of today, and but it's a different rage than the one she had when she did it, and she was 28 when she did it for the first time. Okay, now, you know, in most of the early choreography, there's groups of people who do things. And in a recent choreography, there is more of support. For instance, AJ Indexical is about Agon, choreographed by Balanchine, and it's a deconstruction of the Balanchine, you know, abstract ballet. The one of Le Sacre du Printemps, Riot at the Spring, with the Stravinsky music. It's not the Stravinsky music, it's actually the reinvention of the first evening where there was total chaos in the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées for the premiere of that opera in that ballet choreographed by Nijinsky. And the film is not the reenactment of that reenactment, but it's using that reenactment sound as the soundtrack for a new choreography. We try to incorporate some element and in a recent choreography, the movement, in particular the one we saw yesterday, which is called Assisted Living, Good Sport 2, you do have this kind of fragmented moment where people go back on casual movement opposed to a sequence which actually have really skilled, if you want, needs skill to be executed, therefore needs dancer who are trained and cannot be executed by, and I think that mix of one and the other is really interesting. But what she had done also is actually do a kind of revolving and orchestration of multiple people doing a set piece like 308. So we saw it yesterday with student of Sarah Lawrence, and somebody told me, who told me that, Julie? You remember? Oh, June, yeah. Because she worked at Sarah Lawrence. The student from Sarah Lawrence had been trained by Patricia Catterson, one of the dancers working with Yvonne since 2000, to learn Trio-A. And they did it not exactly synchronized with each other, and they did it 3 or 4 times and left, and other people came in. So the Trio-A was actually extended, I don't know, but at least 15 minutes or something like that, 20 minutes. So, and it's very interesting when you see a dance which is so complex as Trio-A, performed by different experienced dancers, because they do it not exactly, there is absolutely no soundtrack to, it's a dance which has no sound. So the dance, I mean, they probably count a beat, but there is a desynchronization, which they never start synchronized in any case, but there's a desynchronization which get more extended for some dancers and not for others. So those things are a pleasure for people like me who looks at pattern, you know. But the dance is also very interesting for something else, which is key to Yvonne. Trio-A is a dance that refuses to be sexualized. I use that term because Yvonne used it, actually. That demands of the dancer that he or she controls the direction of their eyes in order to avoid looking and referring at the spectator of the dance. In other words, the dancer dance but never look at you looking at the dancer. So they, you know, doing that is a no-no. If I'm in that direction, I have to have my head. We go this way, you know, I never look at, so there is no direct address. Direct address in film term means then you look at the camera, okay? Here there's no direct address in the staging area. And the movement is really interesting because it's deliberate, it never stops, and it's an even speed, which is marking a continuous line with no stop and no start, just the intent of a movement which is flowing without moment of relaxation of tension, as most dance movements do. So it's particularly difficult to do because you have to be able, for the performer, you have to be able to really make your body function in a way which is totally fluid when it's not easy. So I have seen it recently, except for the Sarah Lawrence 2 days ago. I went to LA at Long Beach because Yvonne was in a show at Long Beach, and there was a performance of Trio-A by a dancer, Sarah Cochler, I think, and which Yvonne has trained to be a teacher to teach people Trio-A. And a friend of Yvonne, Simon Long, who is not a twin dancer, and he was dancing it with, which Yvonne has often done. You know, she did that in Story About a Woman Who. She danced Trio-A, and John Herman, a non-dancer, danced with her. You know, so it's interesting to compare a non-twin dancer and a twin dancer, but that was particularly interesting to see because Sarah was, in a way, struggling with trying to be totally fluid. And she told me afterwards she had not done it well. She knew I was there, and she was really upset, you know, not to be perfect. So I reassured her. I thought then she did quite well and whatever. But what I'm describing here, and it's there, then I learned something which I think is fantastic and makes me think then really Yvonne has a long-term view of her work, exactly like Georges Balanchine had of his work, you know. She prepared for the time because she cannot really dance Trio-A now, really like it deserves to be danced. So, but she can still somehow teach it or check that it's done properly. But she has trained so far 5 people who are authorized to actually transmit the dance to other people. And you know those people are going to find 5 people each to transmit the dance to other people. So when Yvonne is there, Trio-A will stay. Okay. So. I'm really happy about that, and I'm going to give you as my last, one of my last lines. Then I think definitely Yvonne has been a gift for me, but I think she has been a gift for everybody who has, has been in contact with her and her work. And it's I think it's in Privilege, but I'm not sure. It's in one of her films. She really taught me in that film. There was a line saying, "Utopia is everything. We have to continue to reinvent it for our own salvation. We need to be reminded that utopia is needed for us to live." And I think Yvonne is still up to the task of presenting us utopian world. So Thank you.
I just want to share something really quick. Barbara Clausen is here, and she is curating the first solo exhibition of Babette's work ever, I've learned. In Montreal, will be opening in January of 2013. So in case you make your way to Montreal, you'll be able to see Babette's work for the first time as a solo exhibition, which is just extraordinary. So thank you, Babette, and thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate. What was that?
Yeah, there should be questions, obviously.
Oh, I guess if you'd like to ask questions, here she is again.
Yeah,
You want to take some questions?
Not my question, your question. Yeah.
So I wanted to hear a little bit from you about then when you go to the place of printing and processing and what happens for you in that relationship with the drill. That question of like when you leave the lab, you're not in that space.
Well, I mean, I did all my lab work, so I did contact sheet the same day or the next day.
But no, I mean like in like the process, like what you felt like in terms of how to take. How you just felt with what you get from your camera, and that if you were looking at those images as like a true, like they had to stay true to telling the story of the scene, or if you're looking at them for something, some other sense, like and I guess this is a question that needs to document.
Well, I mean, I came from a background of being a filmmaker, so obviously. I use photograph first to chronicle change. And that works in theater somewhat, but it does not work really in dance because change is constant in dance. There's nothing still, you know. So you had to invent a new technique to shoot dance, and very often I used two things, which I could not do in my first photograph of the Grand Union because I had an audience behind and there was no architecture in the space I could really, there was a corner or I could have a flat background, but the public was always behind, so it was cluttering the background for the movement and the body of the dancer. But I felt I was doing more interesting images if I was shooting in the middle of a movement rather than at the end of a movement. So I will never do that photograph. I will do a photograph here, between here and there. Okay, that's one thing. And you know, I'm a good analytic mind. I have done mathematics in my youth, and I know how to reflect on what I see and think about it, even if I don't see it. You understand? I kind of replay looking at my contact sheet and say, I goofed there, you know. So you progress by looking at what you do, obviously, and what you have done wrong, yeah. I, in general, always printed a couple of photographs because at that time I was working in a dark room and I had free processing, and I was doing that after hours. So I was paid to work and doing, you know, fashion printing for Avdon or people like that, fashion photographer, and after hours I could use the paper and the chemistry to do my own work. So I was always staying an hour and doing some print. And on occasion, I went back and made other selection, you know. A year later, I did certain work retroactively with things which were not current anymore. But I always did the photography for the future, frankly. I always thought then, you know, Yvonne was the exception. There was always many people to look at what she was doing, but that was not the case of many other people. And Richard Foreman, nobody was looking at this play, you know. There was 5 people there, and I said, but it's absolutely fantastic. And if I don't photograph it, nobody will know that even existed, you know. So I really felt compelled to be there as a witness. And in many ways, for Trisha, when I went to the Sonneban Gallery to shoot some photograph I really like, Group Accumulation, in '73, you know, there were some people, but I could avoid to see the audience, frankly, because there was not that many people. The world was very small, you know. So the reason you were shooting photograph is because not enough people were looking at the work, frankly. Yeah, so that was the motivation. Now, the thrill is when you shoot, and sometime you discover when you shoot, then that photograph has to be great, and indeed it's great on the contact sheet. So I analyzed that, and I made a film about what it is to shoot photograph, and it's called The Camera Je, La Camera I. It's in French and English, and it's, you know, my Bible about shooting photograph. And now that I've done it, I don't shoot photograph anymore. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I have a question as in relation to Yvonne's performances, and also the work that she's done for film. How for you does the performance work in space relate to the performance uses in film? Can you speak about the relation for you as somebody who also works so well and has represented on film? Can you speak about
Yeah,
your viewpoint is in that relationship?
You know, space, performance space and film space is totally different. Because film space, obviously, I have to blow my nose, otherwise I'm going to cough. Film space is actually a mental creation of us, of a sequence. You know, you have close-up, you have long shot, and obviously you construct a space which is rendered by the soundtrack, by the ambient sound you have, as well as the creaking of the floor, and as well as other things. So there is a mental construction you make, which is not necessarily physically represented. And obviously in the performance, you see the totality of the performance, but you also avoid, because you have a selective memory, you just, you know, if it's a solo, you are going to keep with the body of the dancer, and the space will be evacuated as not really meaningful, if you want. In photograph, unfortunately, you cannot avoid the space, so you have to frame the space, and that's why I'm a great photographer, because I never avoid the space. I always compose the space, so my pictures are composed with the background in mind, because I know the background cannot be taken out from the photograph, but it's something you don't want in performance. And actually, as a viewer, looking at the performance, I don't see the background. I see it only because I have to see it because I photograph it, and I don't want to butcher my photograph. So in many ways, you cannot translate one space to the other. Yvonne really had a sense of space, because when she created in Film About Womanhood that table as a bed, you know, that was such an amazing way to impose a space. I mean, there was a very old table, you know, that she had in that loft, and you know, which has this big, we could support a dumpster who was pretty heavy, you know. But she created a kind of stage in the middle of a loft, you know, using a household item and transforming it as a prop. So she had scenic and theatrical tool. And, you know, I knew a lot about theater, because when I was a kid, my parents took us to Paris. We lived in a small town, you know. But my mother loved painting, and my father loved my mother. So he was bringing us and their children, putting us in a cheap hotel, and we were spending 2 weeks at Eastern vacation. So every evening we were at the theater. So I've seen amazing theater. I saw Hélène Vogel, you know, the wife of Bertolt Brecht, and his Berlin theater ensemble of Brecht, doing in German Mother Courage, you know. And the year after, I saw Germaine Montero, a singer, doing it in a French translation. And I had read the text in French translation. My father knew German. He had given me the text to read before we went to see the play. So, you know, I had an education in theater, and I kind of lapped the theatrical element in the performance world of the Judson, which I was reminded when I worked with Bob Morris on Four Pieces by Morris, is what he told me. We wanted to do theater, you know. So the idea of people telling you that Judson is not theater, and it's about being in an indescript loft with no light, you know, it's just because they could not do anything else. They had no money to do better, but, you know, that was not what they wanted to do, you know. So you have also to read people and read what the intent are. So I really don't know how to answer your question about space. I think space is not done the same way, but I think Yvonne had a sense of space, and she designed her image to the point that for me was not interesting to be there anymore, you know. In a way, she designed her image pretty carefully to props, but also to framing. And I could refine the framing and do it really perfect, but, you know, many of the visual decisions I should not take credit for. It's really Yvonne's decision, which obviously I thought was always eccentric and thoughtful and brilliant and much better than what we would have done, because my tendency was to be really conventional, you know. So I owe to Yvonne to have escaped total convention, which is really amazing if you think about it, because it's so easy to fall into it.
Hi. Sort of goes back to the last question. But I'm curious about where you see the line between a photograph that's when is something a document of an event, of a performance, and when is something its own artwork. And I'm thinking about something said about watercolor and how that's not a document of the dance, it's using this dance to make a film. Because you sort of, it seems to me that you worked sort of both ends of that terrain in a really rich way, and I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
It's a difficult question, but I also think it's a false question. It makes no difference if it's one or the other. It makes no difference if it's one or the other. In the case of Watermother, I convinced Trisha to do it. I paid to do it, and she did not particularly want to do it. You know, she told me something charming. She told me, but I can dance it anytime you want. Which I thought was wonderful, because I wanted to see it as many times as I could, you know, but there was no sense of the fragility of the body. And actually a year later, she started to damage the piece and, you know, to incorporate it with accumulation, which is her other great piece from '72. You know, standing accumulation, which is where she used the movement of the arms and so on, which is one of the absolute masterpiece. And she combined both. She combined watercolor with accumulation with talking, and she talked. And she talked in the way she had talked in the Grand Union, the improvisational group, which had been formed by people of the Judson. Yvonne was part of it in 1970. You know, Yvonne went out when she did as a performer, but Trisha and Steve Baxter and David Gordon and others, Douglas Dunn and others, but Nancy Gibbs, I think, continued to be part of it until '76, and there was a lot of talking, which often was coming from Trisha because she was brilliant with words, and I think the real friendship between Trisha and Yvonne rests on words. And on also shared experience of having studied with Anne Alprin and Simon Forley. There's a real bond in there. You know, in a film, in a way, you have to make an interpretation, because you frame and you decide if you cut or if you don't cut. Are you going to handle the continuity of the dance? I decided to do it Fred Astaire style. You know, it was a 3-minute solo, single camera position, single camera move, but I had to move with the camera because, you know, Trisha was coming closer and further away, and I had to give her room too, so I had to use the zoom and a pan. I had to make sure my movement was not contradicting a movement, which is a big issue in film term. When you shoot a movement of somebody moving, you can destroy their movement, and that's horrible, I mean, the best you can do is, if there's a sharp movement, is to make sure the camera is static and the movement occur, and it's only when they are actually resting in a position, then you can come slightly closer in a way which is almost imperceptible, and you can start moving with them maybe when they return, but you have to calibrate when you move with them or when you let them move in the frame. So it's very, very, very involved. It's not a decision you can take without being trained, and you need to know the dance as well as the dancer to be able to film it well. And mostly in my recent dance film, that has been the hang-up because I don't have much time. If there is a group of dancers, I don't have the money to pay them, so I have to do it when they do it for other people, and they are paid for it, and it goes on and on. So the fact you're always in a hurry is not conducive to creative work, frankly, in dance film. Yeah. And there's union, and there's this and that. So in terms of photography, you have much more freedom, obviously, but I don't know. I think when the picture is good enough, it stops being a document, basically. That's what I would say. And also, if the photograph escape the performance and become symbol of the art scene, which happened is what Wolf Peace photograph. It's the picture which was used in '73. It was done in July '73, and that summer it was supposedly everywhere in Germany, and I was never in Germany on that summer. But that photograph was used to signify the New York art scene. So he became more than Trisha. And there, it was shot during a performance. So I was also shooting a movie, actually. I was even distracted shooting photograph, It's a miraculous photograph because it's a miraculous photograph because I'm thinking, how can I make the photograph stronger? And I noticed there was, the roof at a different diagonal, and I said, I'm going to wait until Sylvia Whitman is in that diagonal, and that's the good photograph. It's actually understanding how composition works, so it's not happening by accident. Yeah.
I have a question about the experience of looking, and if you feel that you have a really different experience when you're looking through a still camera versus if you're looking through a movie camera, how it affects your experience of seeing.
I definitely do, yeah. I definitely do. I still take some photograph. Like yesterday, I took a photograph which is miraculous photograph. I showed it to Nico, okay? I had my little camera, my Nikon, which I can change the f-stop, so I shot sky and clouds. I was coming back from the and the camera was there. I had no idea what I was photographing. And obviously, I had preset the focus and the SR. And the photograph is a miracle, There is an edge. I show it to you, Julia. There is an edge of a building, and there is half of a cloud which is out of focus. If you have no edge of building, you will not know that it's out of focus. You think I moved, and you have another edge which is perfectly sharp, and it's a miracle. It's a gift. Photography is always a gift, actually. In film, it's very different because you think of recording sound, and you think of recording something which has to be constant and continuous. So you cannot make sharp zoom out or zoom in, or then you will have to cut them out. So it's maybe possible, but you are more contained if you want. You have to restrict the improvisation because if you do sharp movement, those will have to be deleted if you want. They cannot be kept. Yeah. So in many ways, it's totally a different experience. I now mostly shoot film, but because I have these two digital cameras, I get to shoot mostly color and landscape. It's still photography. Yeah. I don't want to go back to performance because nobody wants to look at photograph or performance anyway. So I like to go and see performance, obviously. Okay.
I would like to look at your reaction to this question because I find it quite interesting.
Which question?
There's always a question about where in your work you do more that move from documentary towards more independent art form. But you said it's of no importance to you, so I find this very interesting.
for me, it's definitely important. I say publicly in text, and especially the text of October, when I reflect on my practice as a photographer. It's called My History, the Intractable. It's actually a beautiful text, I think. Obviously, I benefited from a great editor who polished my English, but the interest in the text is the fact that was the first time I was really asked to reflect on my practice and the impact on the rest of my work. And I really felt I had learned different things from the people I photographed the most, Richard Foreman, Trisha Brown, Yvonne Rayner. I had learned different things from each. And I learned by looking at their work. You know, I never had an agenda as a photographer. I was not particularly interested in having a photograph in the Village Voice. They were paying badly. You know, I was doing. Yeah, I mean, also they want vertical. I never shot vertical in my life. You know, I'm totally an horizontal filmmaker who thinks of a horizontal screen, you know, so I'm not going to shoot what the press wants, which is a vertical image, which in general is a close-up, you know, especially now. In many ways, I saw the difference in the photography I was taking with the people also doing photograph next to me. The most interesting was obviously Peter Moore, who had photographed everybody in the 60s and has the key archive for the 60s work of Yvonne Rayner. But there were other photographers, Nathaniel Tilson and Joan Albers, who were doing good photographs of Trisha and Yvonne when I was also doing those photographs of Trisha in the mid-70s, for instance. And in many ways, they were shooting very differently. They were professional photographers who had actually the mandate to do things which could be printed in the press and in a newspaper or whatever, or in the DTW or in the Performing Art Journal, which are, you know, magazines which are vertical, and therefore you want to have a full page because it costs more money to have a full page than half a page, and therefore they were never doing a horizontal picture. And I cannot see vertically. I mean, I'm sorry. I cannot see vertically. I cannot see square either, sorry. But I say you like square. You like square, yeah. I'm sorry.
But you did it once in the wonderful portrait that you took of Yvonne as Cape Cod, and I think it was 1972.
Yes, that's true.
The avalanche cover.
Yeah.
And the portrait of Yvonne.
Yeah.
But then you did something so unconventional that it was even too avant-garde.
Yeah. You know, Dia did. Yeah, showed the picture because Dia needed to fit it in their program, and they extended the sky. But they gave me the privilege to decide it would be a cloud or not. So they extended the sky.
I found this in their studio visit, just on the
And I think they did it nicely because they extended the sky, but there was a variation with the similar cloud, and I did not like it. I thought it was better if it was gray. Isn't it nice?
You should consult it.
You did?
Oh, yeah, lower it.
Oh,
This
I
is the
don't
back
know.
of the
It's
box
on
that
Yeah.
she shot for Avalanche magazine cover.
Which I did not accept.
And
Because they didn't see, yeah.
I think I had. But it said FBI.
Willoughby took a photo of that photograph of Yvonne. I like Willoughby, you know. He's I thought it was amusing, you know, but it's. I mean, who could not know it was.
It was never published before, or printed rather.
No, but I put it in the announcement of my first show at Anchor's Gallery. And Anchor loved it. She had somebody writing a text on it. So, do you have other questions? No?